so that this piece of legislation is your last block. Sir, the Barbadian public has gone through many, many difficult circumstances. And as a result of that, Barbadians have become sensitive to the issue of who governs them. They recognize that the quality of the team that makes up the government is absolutely critical to them living a peaceful, secure, and prosperous life. And in their wisdom, sir, they elected 30 members of the Barbados Labour Party, resting their confidence in us that we would not only correct the wrongs of the past, but that we would safely lead the country to a place of safety and prosperity. And they were not wrong. Because what they have given unto themselves as a gift is a caring government that hears and sees them, but is not prepared just to feel sorry, but has the competence to build the type of society that we need to be able to go forward. And that's why we have this legislation today. But this piece of legislation is just part of a wide range of activities that have been put in place to help us deal with this issue of raising caring, strong, motivated, confident children. The first thing we need to understand about abuse is that it can operate on two levels. There's passive neglect, and then there's active abuse. And many children suffer from either both. Quite a few of them can suffer from passive neglect. And so what it speaks to is the fact that we need, across every community in Barbados, parenting programs. Because as MPs, we have seen the impact of when there are weak parenting skills, you get dysfunctional families. And nothing exemplified that more than what we saw during COVID, when people were locked up together in these dysfunctional units. It was horrendous for a number of them. And therefore, parenting is something that this government is pursuing. I know, for example, that the Honourable member who heads up the National Peace Program is looking to support a parenting program that will seek to reach across the country. In my own constituency, this year we are doing our second round of parenting program in order to help reach parents who need the help to help us raise children as we ought to. And therefore I want to congratulate the government for launching and going into a parenting program. But there's more to it than that, because there's so much that our children need. Within the schools, there was a time when teachers were alone grappling with everything, teaching, the psychological problems that children have, etc. And what this government has done, we have buttressed our teachers with school counselors, with social workers. And the very last thing we did just a few months ago was to appoint school assistants who will work alongside of teachers and help teachers in the classroom, so that in every class, children have someone who is helping to nurture and support them. This is what we are putting in place to make sure that we grow children who can function well and who can enjoy a decent life. But it does not stop there. The Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Health have sought to collaborate, because one of the things that we've recognized is that you have children coming through the system, but if you're not doing diagnostic testing, you do not recognize when children have problems, either with their sight or with their hearing, or whether it's a learning disability, and indeed some psychological problems. So we recognize that there has been a change in the way parents behave. There was a time when parents understood that you have your child's immunization card, and you had to go back to Enmore or the polyclinic, wherever it was, and get the next set of immunization shots for your child until your child met all the requirements, and then that child could go to school. So parents were diligent about going and doing that. Today, that is not happening. A lot of parents are not taking their children to the polyclinic to get the regular checks, where you can identify and pinpoint problems when they're early. They only take that child when the child is very ill, and they take it to the doctor to get help. So we recognize that as a problem as a government. We recognize that as a problem in the Ministry of Education. So there was a collaboration with the Ministry of Health, and what we started to do was we did some training to create close to 30 pediatric nurses. And the idea is that we want to be able to deploy those nurses in the school where they can do the checks on the children. Even the polyclinics have started a community program. They came to my constituency and did some immunization checks on our children, because as a government, we are serious about making sure that our children are happy, they're healthy, they're confident, they're educated. And I'm not going to forget the nutrition policy. I know some of the children have not enjoyed the reduction of sugar, and some of them have not necessarily enjoyed not getting all their fried foods. But what we are seeking to do is to create a new generation that lives healthy, eats healthy, that we can fight NCDs. And all of this, along with the Child Protection Bill, all of this is a society building a barricade, building a fence, a defensive fence, to make sure that our children are being taken care of and that our children are doing well. Shortly, as you would know, we've had problems with safety in certain schools, and this is very distressing to parents, very distressing. And the ministry has worked assiduously under Minister McConney, the Honourable Member for St. Philip West, putting together a national policy on security. I believe she mentioned it when she was on her feet. But she will be announcing shortly what that will look like. This will again give to parents that confidence. Yes, my child is going to be safe. And this is what a caring government does. This is what you do when you're building a strong republic, that you look holistically around your society and ensure that you put together the package of incentives, the package of initiatives and programs and legislation to ensure that everyone in the society is safe. Now, sir, over the past 15, 20 years, we've had a problem. And part of it may be that some children, through neglect or through abuse, have not done well. Some have not done well in school because we've not used the right methods to help them. And so what Barbados is facing is that we've had several years of children coming from out of the school system without a certificate. And many of us found this out when we were trying to get them jobs during COVID. Realized that they didn't have a skill, not a piece of certificate, nothing to say that they had gone to school. And so one of the things that we have wanted to do is to restore opportunity to them, because they need to have the opportunity to be able to work, to be able to take care of their own families. And so this is why the Barbados Construction Gateway Training Initiative was set in place, and the Ministry of Education is now poised to start the next round of construction gateway training, which will allow us to reach out to all of those people outside of the school system who have not completed their education, to give them a pathway that they can regain a footing in their education. But this time what we're doing, we're structuring that education in a way that they can absorb it. Not just chalk and talk, but sitting and working with them, helping them with remedial aspects of their education, whether it is their literacy or numeracy, whether it's their customer skills, and being able to help them acquire a skill that can allow them to join the other members of the Barbadian Republic and be able to give their contribution, build their families, and make a home. I want to end with this and to remind us that no society can prosper as long as our children are abused. And I want to say to everyone, because there inability to function well in this society will affect all of us. So it is everybody's business, any child that is suffering. And therefore I want to urge through you, Mr. Speaker, the Barbadian public, when you see something, say something. If you're not sure, go to a professional and say, well, look, this is what I have observed. Can you do an investigation? Every single person has to be concerned about this and must participate in this program of protection of the Barbadian children, our heritage, our inheritance, our future. And sir, I want to congratulate the Honourable Member for St. Michael South for bringing this. And I know that he has the commitment of all of his colleagues in working together with him to help make this a reality. I'm obliged to you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for St. Michael East.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I go on any excursion on the history of the struggle, especially for children, I believe it is imperative that I give credit to the Honourable Minister for St. Michael's South. I said before in here, I don't think there is anyone else as fit for the purpose as the Honourable Minister in relation to the challenges that the working class family would have faced throughout the pages of our history. And more in particular, to come up in a rustic community where children experience, and families, black families, experience a wide range of abuse. So he would have had not just the academic training for this specific job, but he would have had the pragmatic experiences of living in a community densely populated, with all kinds of things occurring within those communities. That is really a mirror of the manifestations that are in this specific document called the Child Protection Act. Sir, I also had the privilege to sit on the committee to hear many different perspectives about specific the use of language, words, and what words mean in relation to how they were used within the context of the document which went before that special committee. I also heard different perspectives of the interpretation of the provisions within the bill. Nothing that I heard merit the kind of public outcry that we were experiencing coming from the introduction of this specific bill to this Parliament. And therefore, I believe, based on the void and the substance of the discussion, that what happened in the public domain was nothing more than an effort to achieve some level of political expediency. But when it comes to the substance of this bill, it was a flawless, except for minor typographical errors. It was a flawless document. It was thorough. It is a document that can place itself within the framework of modern reformation. And he is a modern reformationist, sir. There are very few around. And I believe that he's also a harmless individual. I don't know why an effort would be made to demonize the intention of the substance of the document and the person who brought the document before this house. He's not a person who is contemptuous. You might attribute that to me, sir, but he's not. He's a very passive and decent young man. And as I said, he emerged out of humble circumstances. And he applied himself not just to social policy and planning, but he has applied himself to extensive analysis of Caribbean sociology, and more in particular, the sociology of the Barbadian working class. Because this document itself is about the disadvantage to the black working class. It does not relate to any other social type. And that is, I believe that we've hid this issue too long. Because people drive fear in our hearts when we talk about black children, against generalizing, what most people in here did, about children. So other people who never had these experiences don't even understand what is this alien debate about? What are they talking about? We don't know anything about these things. We don't know about foster parents. We don't know about adoption. It is about our people whose family life went through all of these rough patches in our history, that the minister who is trying to modernize legislation has applied himself to. And there must be a preamble that gives clarity to what we're talking, because one of the difficulties that we have had for a long, long time, until in probably recent 10 to 20 years or so, is people being a little more specific about these challenges. So you can only feel it and understand it if you are fully understood that the minister was talking about the problems of black children. We are talking about a body of individuals who, even when emancipation was given, sir, those children who were under the age of 6 did not enjoy the benefits of absolute freedom. They still had to go through, the children had to go through an apprenticeship period at 6 and under. Still had to go back into the bell. Still had to go on the sacred soils of Cotterton Plantation. Do some hard work. Drax Plantation. And do some hard work. When their slave masters fell ill, they had polluted the thoughts of our people so badly that some said, "We sick." We sick. And the slave master used to sit in the chair, let them lay on the ground, rest their feet on the bodies of the small children, and they got the impression that they were helping to cure the illness. But that is psychological damage itself that was inflicted on us. But the people who made the legislation at the time are the people in that colonial period who made that legislation to suit their own interests. Can you imagine somebody putting in legislation that a child, even at the 11th hour, close to the 1830s, must still be held as an apprentice? You understand? Even when the abolition of the slave trade occurred, these people also abolished the slave trade, the triangular trade, but they did not abolish the internal trade, and they encouraged women to produce more and more Creole children in places like Barbados. This country, Barbados, did that to the people. Children, we produced children that had no clear identity as human beings. And we wrestled with that kind of system for probably 30 or so more years. Children into apprenticeship after the slave trade. The abolition of the slave trade, not the abolition of slavery, the abolition of the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade. Because I like to give clarity where clarity is necessary, because you hear some people, including black people, saying that they had slaves before, but you had chattel slaves. You had slaves in Egypt, you had slaves in Rome, you had slaves, but not chattel slaves. The people still was able to maintain their own identity as human beings and enjoy the pleasures of vertical mobility when necessary. So a slave could still marry some person that belong in the higher echelons of the stratification of human existence. But what is happening? So you had legislators then in the House of Assembly in Britain who would go to Parliament and argue comfortably among their colleagues about these things, these injustices. You had child labor. You had child labor. And we only fought desperately through legislation during the period of Duncan O'Neill. It was Duncan O'Neill, a parliamentarian, a social and political advocate, who went off on a campaign to get rid of child labor. You heard the voices of Milton Vaughan in those days about children. The focus was there. I am so happy to see that in modern time, post-colonial time, we have a reformist in this house who recognize that we still have miles to go in order to create comfort for our children, but more extensively for our family. That is what the Honourable Member from St. Michael's South brought to this table, and found himself facing, I almost call it counter-terrorism, because he brought a piece of legislation that is so significant in uplifting the quality of life of not only our children, it is part of our family. You hear, sir, about why our children experience all kinds of problems in life. Diabetes. The honorable members in here with a medical background can correct me if I'm right or wrong. Hypertension. Could not even get a good meal to eat, and everybody drinking as much sweet water as possible. Nobody cared. And children at a very early age was experiencing hypertension and diabetes in the system. If a minister comes now and try to put instruments and provisions in place that will protect the lives of the black children across this country, you don't have to do it for anybody else, not that you're contemptuous of anybody else. There's where the problem lies. That's where the problem lies. You're talking about children who never had an education in the early 20th century, children struggling to get into primary schools in the 20th century. And what the minister has done here, sir, is to bring modern legislation, the very opposite of the theories, the philosophical concepts that would have shaped the pre-independence period, the thinking of those people. They thought in diametrically opposite to what the minister is thinking today. It's like two different strands of thought. One is the opposite to the other. Now we have the time to do all that we can. There's a necessity for a collective understanding of what the minister is trying to do, what he was trying to do. Not that we don't respect the persons who helped with the drafting of the document. But another minister would come here, and when he put the coat, or when he put the fabric over the nakedness of this legislation, you would not be much wiser. And the minister might not be able to defend himself. I didn't hear the minister on this occasion, but I heard him on the first occasion. And when I came up the stairs, sir, I heard praise for the contribution in a way that I've never heard about any other submission before this honorable chamber. And that is not a common thing. You don't normally hear that. So I came to the conclusion, with my man, you would be guilty of a breach of loyalty to your trusted friend that you know over the years expressed these views of redressing these ills as long as he. In fact, even before he came to Parliament, he was saying to me, if he had, and I say that because he was an officer when I was the Minister of Social Transformation. That's why I say it. So I'm not into any theatrical exercises. I worked in the same ministry. I was the minister, and he was in charge of the Gender Bureau. He was appointed to the position in the Gender Bureau because it was the Women's Bureau. That's why I say this is about a family matter, because issues of gender, issues of women, conflicts between male organizations and women's organizations, I know about them. I know when Misa used to express their views. I know when Now used to express their views. And it was in this family, it was as if there was major conflict between males and females. And I thought he was the best person to be referee in these battles, sir. When I spoke to the then Honourable Prime Minister, he asked me, are you sure? And as a consequence, he became the director of the Gender Bureau. He had all kinds of challenges to deal with. So it's not just about the Child Care Board or the Ministry of Education. It is about many other departments and ministries that important social issues must be addressed. I don't want to, sir, I don't want to take up much time on these issues. But I strongly believe that sometimes when these things are implemented, you don't see the immediate benefits of it. Because it deals with process, sometimes it's a new methodology, but it is obvious that it's an attempt to allow the system to operate even in a more humane way than it operated before. And that children must feel the essence of the liberty that comes out of legislation of this type. Children must be able to understand. So that's why I've been also saying we need to feature physically the Convention of the Rights of the Child. I've been making that point all the time. That kind of exhibition is required so that symbolically, apart from a document that most likely will be hidden, or you put it into a digital file, you can have a physical feature in a conspicuous location in the city that children can look and say, these are the tenets, these are the principles that the government stands for. We can erect it. And it's not going to cost $1 million. I know that. And we do other things, and we encourage people to get engaged in other practices that may help to complement the legislation itself. And I mean, we're basically creating a new Barbados, a new society. And I believe that that is why most persons that I heard speaking, they made mention about the Republic. That's even seen to be a fear. Because many Barbadians still don't speak about the Republic of Barbados. I would really love to see Barbadians reaching a level so they can fully appreciate what the transition was all about when we broke ties with the colonial thinkers and the colonial masters of the time prior to the Republic. And therefore, we can also appreciate the post-period, why it is that is a necessity for us to create a new form of human behavior among the Barbadian people. And a greater recognition, I heard the Honourable Member, Minister, that spoke before me, made the point about having a national identity, a consciousness, a national consciousness. It is if these particular issues are instilled in the psyche of the society itself, with individuals and our children, and children really believe that what we're doing is for the upliftment and the improvement of themselves, then we might be in a better position to avoid lots of the criminal activities, lots of the conflict, and the people asking questions about generation gap. There's a generation gap, sir. There's a smooth, life is a smooth continuum of human existence. No man at 5 don't have no more ability than a man that is 105 because he's an old man. And an old man at 5 don't have any rights beyond the rights that a child at 5 possess. Unless you talk about marriage and the child ain't get there yet. But all of these pieces of legislation, sir, constitute the kind of civil society, that any government that is trying to build a genuine republic, I'm not talking about Germany during the days of Hitler, I'm talking about a genuine social democratic society. And what I love about this debate is that whatever perspective any member in this household, they felt, from my observation, I don't know if it is true, but they felt free to express them. And I believe the views that have been expressed will help us to form a consensus in the interpretation of the tenets within the bill, sir, and we will eventually come to the stage of having a new act. Sir, perspectives will differ. I see it as some people hold strong socialist perspectives even when they don't know. Some people hold right-wing perspectives even though they don't know. It's only some of us that are blessed with the understanding of what is right-wing politics for what is left-wing politics, so to speak. We have a clear understanding of if we are in a position to form that compromise that bring a balance to what we now call social democratic principles. Unless it's Islamic or something as a model, but I believe that the best model that will work in the present circumstances. I'm a Pan-Africanist, and I don't hide it, but I am very strongly influenced by socialist principles. And therefore, sometimes people believe that I'm off track because it is common to run the right-wing strand and believe that you're saying something that sounds logical, but is only detrimental to the society itself. So I want to fully support, without reservation, this bill brought to this chamber by the Honourable Member for St. Michael's South. And I'm glad, sir, to be able to proceed my contribution, and I hope that it has helped to give the crystal and the clarity to the entire conversation today, sir. Thank you very much for allowing me.
Honourable Member for St. Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I too want to add my voice to this debate. I, at the outset, want to commend the Minister for his outstanding work in bringing this particular piece of legislation to Parliament. I felt it important, Mr. Speaker, that I, as a person who is not only a parent, but was also a teacher at some point, should have a few words to say in support of this bill that seeks to broaden the protections that now currently exist for children within our society, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, children living in today's society are characterized by a society that is always in flux, is changing society, Mr. Speaker. And though children are adapted to that change, sometimes us as adults do not readily adapt to the changes that we see in society. But more importantly, and I think, which is more critically, sometimes the legislation does not adapt to the changes within society. And I think that is where I believe this piece of legislation has its most importance, because it brings, as the member for St. Michael's South said, it brings modernity to legislation that existed in a period. And I'm glad that I'm coming after the member for St. Michael East, because he speaks of a period where persons like us were seen as no more than chattel. And we were going on a piece of legislation that was drafted in a time where within that period that is considered by historians as the lost century. You've often heard of the lost decade. But there was a lost century between 1847 and 1837, just shy of a century, where persons like us had no kind of rights, zero rights. Whether you were a child or you were an adult, zero rights. Maybe in legislation, on paper, there were rights, but they didn't apply to you as a people, and to us as a people, as a black people living in this society. But yet, we draw on that period to protect our children. It says to me that legislation really has not kept up. Today, the family, the household is completely different. The needs are different. Parenting is different. When many of us grew up, we had grandparents in the house who were home. Most persons work around the house, especially if you grew up in the country. You work close by, or maybe you had a piece of agricultural plot that you worked in. But there were always persons within the home, always adults within the home. Now, a lot of children, because of the workloads of their parents, because both parents are working, sometimes they are single families, and that single parent is working, and she's away from the house, or he's away from the house for protracted periods of time. That child is at home, in many cases, having to almost raise itself. Or that child is at home with some other relative or neighbor or someone who's older that is now in a position, because of the fact that the child is alone, now in a position to interfere or to abuse that child. This is the reality that we live in today, Mr. Speaker. And this all has to do with the changing realities for work and how persons work in society. And what has resulted, and we've seen it over the last couple of years, is that there's certain forms of abuse that I believe have almost become normalized. Like, you see it, you know that it's abuse, but you don't say anything because, it's like, happens all the time. When you see a child that's 13 or 14 years old pregnant, of course, the worst of it is that the child will be shamed and the family will be shamed. But sometimes people do not even see that as abuse, that there's some young man or some old man out there who has abused that child. That means that we have normalized, in some societies, not everywhere, that whole thing, that the worst that could come of it is that the child be embarrassed and the parents be embarrassed. Not realizing that the child's life is changed forever, sometimes for the worse. Not realizing that the child's education is disrupted, sometimes never to resume. Not realize that psychologically, the child is damaged. Because that child now becomes, at 13 or 14 years old, an adult. And in some extreme cases, that child has to then fend for itself at 13 and 14 years old and undergo even more abuse at the hands of unscrupulous adults in order to survive, and for the child that the child has given birth to survive. And this is just some of the realities that we face. And I said that because I want people to understand why children have to be protected. Because a lot of us have never experienced these things. But being a teacher, I've had the unfortunate situation where I had to speak to children who've been abused. I've seen them at school with 2 and 3 months pregnant before they have to leave and go home, because after a certain time it's not safe for a young child to be in a school environment pregnant. I've seen them before that period, so I know these things happen. And I've also seen that in many cases nothing becomes of it in terms of the fact that the parents either do not want to press charges against the individual. And because of, I mean, sometimes they think they have practical reasons, or maybe the young man will help support the child. You know, maybe you don't want the child to grow up with his father in jail. They come up with all kinds of excuses, Mr. Speaker. All kinds of excuses to let people get away with murder practically. To let people commit a crime, to let people abuse a child and with impunity and get away with it. I think these are things that have to stop. There are parents out there who are not willing to do what it takes to ensure that these things never happen to children in this country. And I think it's important that the state put the necessary bits of legislation in place to ensure that children are protected for situations like that. There's no good situation or no good reason why a child that is abused at 12 and 13 years old, 12 and 13 years old, should be allowed to go and live a normal life where the abuser gets off and comes around the child on the guys that they're supporting the baby, or the guys that they're supporting the family. No, it should never be allowed to happen. I remember as a young boy working at DW, a little girl she was 11 years old and pregnant. 11 years old and pregnant. Big pregnant too. Oh, she was actually there pitching marbles with us. And in that community, people were busy, but it was like almost, it was normal. You know, like, yeah, she's pregnant, so what? So what? You know? No, we should never be in a situation where we normalize that kind of behavior. And I think because of the limited scope in terms of intervention that the previous legislation had, we were restricted in that regard. But now I find that we now have expanded the powers of the authorities to intervene, sometimes way before the situations get to a head, sometimes way before the situations get to where they are. And I think and that is what had certain people who felt the need to protest, against the interventions of the state. Because there are persons, and I experienced it just recently when we were in a session of the Joint Select Committee that looked at the cybercrime bill, where persons do not see the need for early intervention. Where we were discussing, and the honourable member for St. Michael South Central just left, but she was there. And persons were saying to me, after we discussed that the police should have the right, or the state should have the right to intervene before a crime is committed, persons said that was intrusive, that was on the part of the state. But in actual fact, we were speaking of situations where you have in this society now that has changed, where you have cyber grooming as a form of abuse, where an adult man, could sit down on a phone and send sweet nothings to a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old. Yes? I make plans to meet that 12-year-old or 13-year-old. And let me tell you, I'm no scientist, I've never done, but I've read on occasions that when you read something is far more impactful when you read it on WhatsApp or on social media. Something is far more impactful than if you said it to the person in person. You know, when somebody writes something to you, you know, you look in their eyes, you know they're joking, you know they're just gaffing, or you know they're serious. But when you read it, you can only interpret it how you imagine the person is saying it to you. So a small child that doesn't know any better and someone writes something sweet to them, pays them a compliment. How nice they look in this cool clothes. You know, you're blowing that child's mind. And you doing quick, so you have the child's confidence, and you've gained the child's trust. And you now have the ability to do whatever you want to do with that child. You could get that child to meet you anywhere. You could get that child to invite you into the school and go to a part of the school where they know other children won't be. And these are things that happen just because of a conversation that was had on social media. And you were saying that we should not have, as a state, the authority or the flexibility or the means to intervene long before that conversation gets to the point where a physical meeting is put in place. No, all that is abuse. All that is a form of abuse. That's a form, you get into a child consciousness. I like the term that the member used. You get into a child's consciousness. And first make her to believe that A, what you are saying to her or him is more important than what the parents was teaching them all their lives. And B, that coming and seeing you in a physical space and let you do to them what you were begging them to do online, in the real, in person, is okay, is a form of abuse. And I think that any person who engages in that type of activity should, long before they see the child, that the state should intervene. There should be a process where that person is snatched up, locked up, and just like the member for St. John, after summary conviction, and then put on a list. So that people all over Barbados would know about, see, you're pitiful, man. What list? Nasty. So I support that. And I think any piece of legislation that seeks to put any form of protection in to protect our children from those kind of people, those predators in our society, predators, I would give it my full support. And the sad thing is that there's still some who do not see that type of behavior as predatory, that don't see that type of behavior as wrong. You know, as a student, you would often come outside and you would see big men. I mean, they were young men. They were probably in their 20s, most of them. But they were big men compared to the 15 and 16-year-old children in school. And they were waiting outside the gates. They were waiting in the van stand. They were waiting on the vans. They're driving the van sometimes. They're conducting the van sometimes. And they're waiting and they're scoping. And they know that the odds are that some child, some little girl, of the thousands of school children in the school system in Barbados, some little girl they're going to hook. Maybe one or two. And you see this, and within that culture, this is treated as normal. So that's why I think it's important that we have to change the culture. That means that we have to lock up some people in this country. Then if that's what it takes, then that's what we have to do, because we have to change that culture that makes it okay for a big man to look at a small child and feel that he can inferior you or inferior him. We have to. And I think this piece of legislation goes a long way in starting that process, because it's going to take some time. It's going to take some time for our young men and some of our adults realize that we are serious about protecting our children from all forms of abuse. Now, I would have focused on that form, but all forms of abuse. So, Mr. Speaker, I didn't never intended to be long. I just wanted to make that quick intervention. It's going to take a collaborative effort, of course. Other pieces of legislation, even some that are now going through the process, we all have to work together. Departments, certainly education, those in other fields have to work together to ensure that every measure, every step, everything is done possible as a state to protect our children. And Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged.
Honourable Member for St. Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, I believe that we've had 2 days of excellent presentations by members of this chamber. And I suppose that anything that I might say now would be considered to be trying to gild the lily. And I know you know well what that means, sir. The depth of the presentations have been extraordinary, and perhaps more than anything else demonstrate a human side of this government that is sometimes ignored or forgotten when we talk about taxation and new criminal laws and a whole set of other stuff. We've always made it clear that our social program was to take on as much importance as all of the other programs. And one of the things that has always been clear to us, even from opposition days, has been the fact, sir, that we were relying on very old legislative instruments to govern modern Barbados. And you know, Mr. Speaker, we've had a lot of criticism of this bill. And I suppose they say if you're in a boxing match, expect to get a few cuffs. So in the cut and thrust of politics, in the cut and thrust sometimes of governance, you will always have criticism. And in fact, it's also said, Mr. Speaker, if you don't get criticized, then it means that something is wrong. We've taken the criticisms in our stride. We recognize that at this point, we are looking to completely transform the relationship between the state and our juveniles, and the relationship between individuals and our juveniles. And therefore, it is anticipated, it is expected that there will be individuals who are uncertain as to what it is we are bringing. I'm not going to go over what we are bringing, Mr. Speaker, and I'm not going to be long. My colleagues have done that more than ably. But, Mr. Speaker, to have had a piece of legislation dating back to over 100 years, at a time when the concept of rights of the child was non-existent, at a time when Barbadians largely survived in a state of poverty, at a time when the supervisory role of the state was minimal. Mr. Speaker, laws for that era cannot govern us now. It is a delicious irony, sir, that we had a piece of legislation called, but we still have it, the Prevention of Cruelty to Children Act. And in the laws of Barbados, it is located more or less around the same place as the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. And I believe that if you check, Mr. Speaker, you will see that they were both passed at the same time. I would not be so brutal as to say that the politicians of that era considered or to consider their animals and children through the same lens. But it is a coincidence, Mr. Speaker, that we should be unhappy with. It's a coincidence, Mr. Speaker, that we should rail against. Our children, the children of Barbados, need to have a new deal. And this piece of legislation brings it. It is obvious, sir, that we are going to have institutional reform. And in that regard, there are just a few things that I want to mention. In this piece of legislation, there are not a lot of penal provisions. It doesn't mean, sir, that wrongs done contrary to the provision of this act are not being treated in a very serious way. But we recognize that it is very easy to say, if you do this, it's against the law, and you will end up in court, and on and on and on. And if you do that, there's another breach. And we have many pieces of legislation which really tells you from section to section to section to section what you cannot do. This act, sir, in many respects, tells people what we expect of them. It tells people in quite clear terms the standard to which we intend to hold you in relation to the children under your charge. This act reinforces the values that Barbadians instinctively hold dear. I really have to reflect on the criticisms that this bill got. And I really wondered whether these individuals were living in the same place that we were living in. They made all kinds of scurrilous accusations that we were trying to bring an LGBTQ agenda into how we deal with children, that we were trying, all kinds of things that bear no relevance at all to the act. And the one common response that they gave when challenged, well, I didn't read the act, I saw it someplace on social media. Mr. Speaker, this is a serious administration. And we at all times have engaged with Barbadians in every forum, in every one. We've not run away from the hard questions. We've not run away from the ideas that challenge what we think is right. And in many respects, where we see that there's an opportunity for a middle ground, we find it. Where we see there's an opportunity for compromise or to accept a different view, sir, we've done so. This bill will protect our children in a way that the legislation in previous years, in the previous era, did not. It has benefited, Mr. Speaker, from a tremendous amount of study. It has benefited from a tremendous amount of social work. It has benefited from the input of all of our specialists. And I'm proud, sir, that we've had a hand in bringing a new deal to our young people. At the opening, the Act says that the purpose of the Act shall be to first ensure, and by first I don't mean in a preeminent way, I only mean in the list, to ensure compliance with the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. It is also to ensure compliance with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and all other international instruments to which Barbados is a party, with special regards to those which afford the child the necessary protection and assistance so that he can assume his eventual potential in our society. It is to promote the welfare of a child, to promote the care and protection for a child. It is to protect a child from abuse and neglect, and to ensure that the best interests of the child is given paramount consideration in all of these matters. Mr. Speaker, nothing in that list could be said to offend the moral standing of Barbadians. Nothing in this list could be said to offend the values that Barbadians hold dear. There's not a person within earshot of this parliament, if you ask them, would you want us to pass a law to protect the welfare of children, to provide for their care and protection? So there's not a person who would say no. We understand that there is some difference in how you achieve it. But I think, Mr. Speaker, that this bill strikes the right balance. It reinforces the importance of parental control and guidance. Nowhere, sir, nowhere are we taking away the powers of a parent. The state will intervene in circumstances where the level of care and welfare of a child falls below the mark. But what is that mark? This is not a case where you look at somebody who is poor and say, well, you're not able to take care of a child. Mr. Speaker, you and I both came up in environments where our parents were poor. But we had the benefit of loving families. Those are Barbadian values. The Prime Minister spoke about some of the things that helped to focus her when she was a child. You know, the interesting thing, Mr. Speaker, is there is no law to tell you how to raise a child. And you and I both know that children don't come with manuals. They're in a box of instructions telling you what to do or what not to do. We almost instinctively know what is right, but we have a whole society that helps to guide us as well. We have a whole set of structures, a family structure, the benefit of the church, benefit of the schools, benefit of our communities. So even though they don't come with a manual, sir, we simply know what is right. And this bill reinforces what is right. The Honourable Minister who led this bill, who led the debate on the report of the committee, went through a whole series of provisions. And one of those that I want to mention, Mr. Speaker, is the role of the court. Mr. Speaker, because of the new structures that we're putting in place, there will be opportunity for the court to get involved in a way, Mr. Speaker, that hardly exists now. For example, if you look at Section 40 of the Act, it says, the court may, on the application of the director, make an order for supervision of a child by the director or a person recommended by the director to perform the duties of a supervisor. Mr. Speaker, you know what obtains now? If there is a problem with a child, the child care board will almost routinely get called in. What are the child care board's powers? It boils down, for the most part, to the child care board having to make a decision. Is this situation one where I need to take this child away from this family or leave it in the family? There's no gray, Mr. Speaker. It's black or white. You either go away and leave the child there, or you say, I have to remove the child from this environment. That, of course, is always the last resort. This bill now brings the concept of supervision. Never existed before. Never existed before. A court can make an order to allow the supervision of a child by the director or a person recommended by the director to perform the duties of a supervisor. But the court won't just make that order, sir. The court has to be satisfied that a child is in need of care and protection. The supervision order may require a child, his parent, or the child and his parent to report to the supervisor at a place and at intervals stated by the supervisor. So what does that tell you, sir? The child is not removed from the parent. Nobody is taking the parent and taking the child and separating them. That's not happening. It is clear from the statute that the child, even though the director of the New Child Protection Agency considers that it needs something, the language is that the child is in need of care and protection, even in those circumstances, sir. The director has a wide range of discretion, which did not exist before. And provisions like this allow state intervention in a way that doesn't rip apart families. There are parents, sir, some in my constituency, some in yours, who need help. They may be suffering from all kinds of things. Barbadians seem to be having, I'm told that we have some mental issues at a level that we probably didn't have before, perhaps due to the stresses and strains that are present in today's society. I'm no psychologist, so I'll leave it alone. But I know, sir, that in my constituency, in every constituency, there are parents who are struggling to give their children the care that they want, that they need, to provide the adequate welfare for them. I don't mean welfare from the state, I mean giving them all the things that are required for their well-being. These kinds of sensible provisions say the state will work collaboratively with the parent to try to produce the best result for that child, taking into account the family structure. They're mandated to take part in discussions with the supervisor. This is not ripping a family apart, so this is standing in and saying, how can I help? The state is at its best, Mr. Speaker, when it is able to reach out a gentle hand, a soft touch, and say, let me help you. Let me help you. So for the first time, sir, we are looking at the issue of child welfare, child well-being, through a completely different lens. We're going to be getting rid of things like wandering, sir. And I know people who got sent up Dodds because they were wandering. And I know that's going to be discussed in next week's bill, but the point I'm making is that our legislation had, and I know the member who spoke twice before me, will be talking about the laws that were made by the planter class. Laws that were made by people who are not like us, but that reflected a value system that made sense to them. So we have these Victorian laws that would talk about wandering and so on, and that the police could pick up a child and carry them up Dodds if they had no reasonable explanation. And I've seen individuals, I know them. We all know individuals, youngsters who've been picked up like that. Mr. Speaker, this act, despite whatever the naysayers say, provides a soft touch by the state. But, Mr. Speaker, it involves the courts. And in that regard, let me just say very briefly that while we do not have a structured division to deal with matters related to children, we do have a family law division where there are dedicated judges. It isn't a big division, so I believe there are 2, at most 3 judges who are assigned to the family law division. But that is a far cry, sir, from when I started practicing law and when you started practicing law. Because there were no divisions. Everybody did everything. Everybody did everything. Today you're doing a personal injury matter. Tomorrow is a defamation action. Next is a construction case, and on and on. And somewhere in there you're tucking 2 divorces and perhaps a maintenance matter. They did everything. But today, sir, we have a family law division where the judges are required to concentrate, to focus their efforts on dealing with family law matters. And I've told the minister that with the swearing in of a new Chief Justice, which happened today, that I will make sure that his department meets with the Chief Justice at the earliest opportunity, because this legislation has the potential to throw up a significant number of new kinds of applications, and our judges need to be made aware of what it will involve. Judges don't practice their craft in vacuo. They get training in all kinds of things. And we're going to be meeting with the Chief Justice to say, Judge, Chief Justice, we have new legislation coming. We need your judges to be familiar with it, to develop protocols for how they want to deal with these matters. But the most important protocol has to be one of urgency. These matters are not going to be matters that you can afford to adjourn and adjourn and adjourn and adjourn, kick the can down the road. These are matters that are going to have to be dealt with urgently. Sir, I wish that we could set up a special juvenile division. I wish we had those resources. Perhaps in times to come, we may be able to carve out, when we see how much work is involved, we may be able to carve out a small subsection who can deal with this. But I believe that our systems are such that the family division of the Supreme Court will be more than able to handle the applications that are thrown up by this. But we have to have a dialogue with the current Chief Justice, who's just been sworn in, so that his judges are on the same page. Mr. Speaker, this is a novel. This is not novel. When we were working on the cybercrime legislation, we met with judges. We met with judges because they're the ones who have to be the deciders. And therefore, they need to be familiar with it so that when it comes to them, when matters come to them, they're going to be able to address them. The other matter I want to mention here, sir, before I sit down on a Friday afternoon, there are a number of things in this bill, in fact, mandatory reporting. There's a requirement for mandatory reporting, and that has already been covered off by my colleagues. I don't need to go into it. When we say mandatory reporting, it means that if a certain category of individuals, teachers, police officers, priests, other individuals like that, people who are likely to be in loco parentis of a child, or who because of their office have a special relationship with the child, if they know of something that is deleterious or harmful to the welfare of the child, they're under an obligation to report it. Now, nobody will say that that is anything wrong with that. No, nobody could say that. I hope nobody says that, because when you see things going wrong and it is 2 adults, you don't worry about it. They'll fix it. They'll work it out. They'll follow the agree back. You move along. Not the case when our children are at stake. There's an obligation to report. But how are we dealing with this, sir? This administration has taken the decision, for many reasons, that what we call administrative breaches will not be dealt with in the court system. So we will not be, for an administrative breach, we're not going to be charging anybody with a criminal offense, putting them in handcuffs, carrying them to the station, dragging them before the district or the district magistrate court. They got to go and stand up in the dock and all that kind of stuff. We're not about that, sir. That will be appropriate in some instances. But for administrative breaches, and an administrative breach, sir, is really a failure to do something that you ought to have done, but there's no criminal intent involved. No criminal intent involved. So in respect to the mandatory reporting, we've taken a decision that we are going to do as we've done in the Vendors Act. People who vend illegally, we're not dragging you before the court and giving you a criminal record. We're not doing that. So we're taking the same approach in relation to mandatory reporting in this legislation. It does not mean that it is not serious. Let's get that clear. Because the life and well-being of a child may be at stake if you see something and don't report it. But all we're saying is we are not going to treat you like a criminal if you make that omission. But the fine, the penalty, sir, is going to be fairly stiff. The penalty is going to be $5,000 for that. If you are aggrieved, then you can apply to the High Court, and the High Court can say, well, we can give you a break. We can remit the fine so you don't have to pay the penalty. We will reduce it because you really didn't know. You ought to have known, but you didn't know, so we can bring it down from 5,000 to 100. The judge could also say, you what? Man, they can double this. So if you are a person upon whom an administrative penalty is imposed for failure to report, then you can appeal to the court to get that done. Mr. Speaker, I don't want to labor in the chamber overly long. This piece of legislation is cutting edge, and it has my fullest support. I believe that in time, those Barbadians who are uncomfortable with it will see clearly the value of it and recognize that it has been done not just with the best of intentions, but upon the best of advice. I support this legislation. Sorry? Yes, Mr. Speaker, I want to postpone further consideration of this debate.
Question is that this bill be further postponed.
Debate before the
That debate be further postponed of this bill. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. Further debate of this bill is postponed.
Mr. Speaker, order number 12 on the supplementary order paper in the name of the leader of government business to move the passing of a resolution that the Honourable, the House of Assembly concur in the amendment made by the Honourable the Senate to the Income Tax Amendment and Validation Bill 2024.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the passing of a resolution. I beg to give notice. Beg to move? Beg to move the passing of a resolution that the Honourable the House of Assembly concur in the amendment made by the Honourable the Senate to the Income Tax Amendment and Validation Bill of 2024.
Question that order number 12 on the supplementary bill, the resolution for that be passed. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it. This resolution stands passed.
Mr. Speaker, paper is recommitted.
Oh, please don't. Go ahead.
Honourable member for Christchurch, East Central.
Mr. Speaker, I am commanded to lay the deed of guarantee between the Government of Barbados, acting through the Ministry of Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment as guarantor, and the African Export-Import Bank as lender relating to obligations under a US $25 million term loan facility agreement between Kensington Oval Management, Inc. and the African Export-Import Bank.
Honourable member, this is a correction to this bill. Right.
Correction.
Mr. Speaker, we've come to the end of our business for the day. Of course, I want to wish everyone a good weekend, bank holiday on Monday. I'd like to move, sir, that we adjourn,
Suspend, honorable member.
suspend today's sitting until Tuesday, 21st at 10 a.m.
Question is that this honorable chamber be suspended until Monday, the 21st day, Tuesday, the 21st day of May 2024 at 10 a.m. in the forenoon. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This honorable chamber stands suspended until Tuesday, the 21st day of May 2024 at 10 a.m. in the forenoon.